My name is Chris Lockwood, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this very special webinar with Samira Ahmed, the author of the New York Times bestseller, Internment. Before we begin, just a quick note, the chat is open for your comments and reactions throughout tonight's event, but Samira, Bridget and Elizabeth will only be answering the questions that you submitted during your registration. A huge thank you to Naaman Kent and Katie Mudd for all their hard work behind the scenes to make everything possible this evening. And now I'm thrilled to introduce tonight's interviewers, two members of the ELA Honor Society Advisory Council, Bridget Colabello and Elizabeth McLaughlin. So here are their bios. Throughout her 30-plus year career, Bridget has inspired a deep appreciation for literacy and the humanities in generations of energetic and enthusiastic students. A devoted Edgar Allan Poe fan, she celebrates the master of Gothic horror each October by wearing a different Poe-themed shirt every day. She proudly admits to owning more than 30 of them. Bridget is also a firm believer in the power of extracurricular engagement. She advises both the school yearbook and the literary magazine, creating meaningful opportunities for students to explore their voices. One of her greatest recent joys has been co-founding the Edgar and Abe chapter of the ELA Honor Society at Morgan Road Middle School in New York. Elizabeth is a veteran middle school English language arts teacher who places socio-emotional learning at the heart of her work. She's dedicated to blending character education with literacy instruction, using her curriculum to help students grow both academically and personally. An avid reader herself, Elizabeth actively cultivates a love of reading in her classroom by introducing students to new and relevant YA literature. She has served as her school's avid teacher, championing the value of higher education and empowering students to pursue academic excellence. Beyond the classroom, Elizabeth leads a wide range of student programs, including the yearbook, student council, buddy program, and peer mediation, reflecting her strong belief in educating the whole child. She leads the ELA Honor Society chapter at Juan Pablo Duarte Jose Julian Marti School 28 in New Jersey. Bridget, Elizabeth, thank you for being here and for everything you do for the ELA Honor Society. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Samira Ahmed is the best-selling author of Love, Hate, and Other Filters, Internment, Mad, Bad and Dangerous to Know, Hollow Fires, and the Amira and Hamza middle grade duology, as well as a Miss Marvel comic book miniseries. Her poetry, essays, and short stories have appeared in numerous publications and anthologies, including the New York Times, Take the Mic, Color Outside the Lines, Vampires Never Get Old, and A Universe of Wishes.
She was born in Bombay, India, and grew up in Batavia, Illinois, in a house that smelled like fried onions, spices, and potpourri. A graduate of the University of Chicago, Samira has taught high school English in both the suburbs of Chicago and New York City. She's worked in educational nonprofits and spent time on the road in political campaigns. Samira currently lives in the Midwest. When she's not reading or writing, she can be found on her lifelong quest for the perfect pastry. Now I'm getting hungry. Welcome, Samira.
Hi, Bridget. Hi, Elizabeth. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I highly suggest people join me in a lifelong quest to find the perfect pastry. It is an excellent hobby.
I'm on board with that for sure. So we have a wonderful slew of questions that Elizabeth and I are going to be posing to you, and I'm going to get started right off the bat with a question from Elizabeth McLaughlin from New Jersey. And she would like to know, when you were younger, what did you imagine yourself doing?
So I love the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's a question I still ask myself every day, because I think it's important for adults to ask themselves that question too. But I love little kid answers to that question. And I had 3 answers when I was little. Number 1, a ballerina. Number 2, a tennis player. And number 3, a doctor. I did not become any of those things for a variety of good reasons. You'll notice that I never said I wanted to be a writer in that mix, because that wasn't a dream that I had initially. I actually, as I got a little older, I realized I wanted to be a high school English teacher, and then I worked in education nonprofits, as you read in my bio, and I love doing those things too. But I also believe in keeping yourself open to your dreams, because sometimes your dreams can change. And I didn't become a ballerina because I really had no grace at all, but I did get a 2-2 out of my first class. So it was actually, I feel that as a win, and now I'm an author, which is, another profession I love being.
Thank you.
Amazing. And it's never too late to be a ballerina, you know.
I mean,
classes.
Yes, that's true. Maybe not on a professional level, but I would completely take a 2-2 right now.
As would I. Okay, our next question comes from Celeste Riley in Tennessee, and she wants to know, how did you get started as a writer, and how can young students begin their own writing journey?
So in that first question you asked me, I said, well, I never imagined being a writer when I grew up. It wasn't really a dream I had until I was older, but I always was writing. Since I was a little kid, I kept journals. I mean, literally, I think I still have some journals from 5th grade, which I try not to read because it's like a lot. It's very cringeworthy to read some of your own stuff, especially like my poetry from high school, which was very dramatic and goth and stuff. But I always loved writing, and I was always writing for fun. And I really encourage young people to do that. You don't have to know that you want to be a professional writer and author to just enjoy writing. So I really encourage people to write just for fun. That's what I did, and that's what essentially led me into my journey to become an author, because I was writing for fun, and I found I was doing it more and more, and I was getting more enjoyment out of it. And initially it was like, yes, some of it was journals, and then I started writing more poetry and sometimes little short stories just for myself for fun. Sometimes I would read them to friends. And then I got an idea for a story that I thought maybe I would write as a short story, but it really kind of stuck with me, kind of like an earworm, like when a song gets in your head and you can't get it out. And that eventually became my first novel, Love, Hate, and Other Filters, because somewhere along the lines I realized, I think this is more than a story. And you know what? Maybe I'm just going to give it a try. So I think one of the worst things we can do is say no to ourselves, especially in those early stages of just creativity, because I think all kinds of creativity should just be fun. So I think for young people, if you feel motivated to write, just write. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't need to even be something that you're going to show anyone. But even, for all those years that I was writing just for myself, I still found it very fulfilling. It was a creative outlet. And
our esteemed students are dismissed at this time. Esteemed students are dismissed at this time.
No worries. I was a high school teacher, so I get it.
Here we go.
So I just really encourage people of all ages to, if you feel moved to write, then just write.
Such great advice. We say it all the time. Just do it. So now the next questions are really surrounding internment, and one. Judith Villada from Georgia and Sarah Hernandez from Minnesota. Similar question. What first encouraged you to write Internment? And how did that idea come to be?
So I actually wrote Internment was published in 2019, but publishing is a very long process. And so I first had the idea for Internment probably in 2015. And I wrote the entire first draft of Internment before the end of the year in 2016, before the 2016 election. And sometimes people are surprised by that. And I think there were a few things that gave me the idea for an internment. I mean, one was, just some of my personal experience with Islamophobia. I lived in New York City during 9/11 in Manhattan. Obviously, just a horrific tragedy. And being there in the aftermath, when I saw this sort of rise of Islamophobia and how easy it is for, large swaths of people to blame an entire group for the actions of individuals, which we've seen throughout history. I mean, it wasn't just new in 9/11. I mean, any study of history will show that. And you can easily take that back, as I did in Internment, to 1933 with the rise of Hitler in Germany, and how the Jewish people were blamed for everything. And So I had some personal experiences with Islamophobia, and I specifically also remember reading about, um, uh, well, there was a Sikh cab driver in New York City who was attacked in a knife attack while driving his cab because his passengers thought he looked Muslim because he was wearing a turban. I guess they aren't able to understand the distinction, and they were blaming him for 9/11. And I think that experience, plus things that happened after, for example, the Oklahoma City bombing, the very first person of interest happened to be somebody that shared my last name. Now we all know Timothy McVeigh was the one who committed that act of terrorism. But he initially, this person whose last name was the same as mine was a person of interest. The police were looking for him, and that set off for me in a huge amount of like prank calls and that kind of thing. I even had a student who came in to my classroom and called me a terrorist, like right there to my face. So those examples are things that I think always stay with you, and honestly, they're not unique to me. Any brown person or black person in America has probably had similar or far worse experiences than that, and it made me think a lot about scapegoating and how we scapegoat. How we like to find a villain in a group, and what it means to sort of transfer our prejudices onto an entire group of people and how much that group of people can suffer. So I think all of those things were sort of in the back of my mind. And in the lead up in like 2014, 2015, 2016, I was seeing more and more of that, especially as in the way that Americans were, not all Americans, but in the way some Americans and some politicians were talking about immigrants, we're talking about Muslims, we're talking about, migrant workers. So I think all of that was kind of in the zeitgeist, and it was always in the back of my mind. And I had also been reading recently about Japanese American internment, the illegal incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. And I think all of those sort of combined, and I thought to myself, like, what if? Because books ask that question, what if? That's one of the great novel questions, right? What if this happened? And I guess in my mind, I was like, what if America didn't learn from its history, which is something we often fail to do? And what if we replicated things that happened in the past? So even though I wrote that book before the Muslim ban and before so many other things that happened, that book isn't prescient. Internment is based on things that have happened in history. And virtually everything that occurs in internment is something that I have taken from either American history or, broadly like European history, or even bigger than that, global history, especially when you're looking at people who are being put into internment camps, how laws are introduced to create an other, and how authoritarianism and fascism can take hold even in a democracy.
Yeah, it's so important, right? Especially for the youth of today, to keep that in their minds, to keep that in their forefront. And hopefully we will learn from history, or at least they will, right? That's the hope.
Yep, I'm always hopeful for that.
Yeah. Our next question is very similar, from Anissa Swoop in Tennessee, Carson Mills in Louisiana, and Claire Herrick in New York. All want to know, where did your inspiration come from? And were there moments in your life or people close to you that shaped specific aspects or scenes in internment?
I don't think there were, I always try to create the characters as their own individual people. So I don't really try to take anybody from my life or history. I'm building them as their own people. In part because I don't want, my family and friends to yell at me and be like, wait, is that supposed to be me? But also, again, I feel like I'm influenced so much by history, even though Internment is a speculative novel that is set, as I say, 15 minutes into America's future. Although it was written in 2019 and it feels like that future is getting ever closer. But I was very fortunate to be able to share an early draft of Internment, and even talking before I even had drafted it, talking to a friend who is Japanese American and whose mother had been illegally incarcerated, was in an internment camp. And in talking to her, and also I had met a number of refugees from, this is back a bit before, but from the former Yugoslavia, when that broke up, and I had met some refugees here in Chicago and was talking to them about some of their experiences. And some of those things really, they really sit with you. And when we can see what was happening, for example, at that time, like with refugees who were trying to escape to get to Europe, who were in these boats, I think all of those things were sort of in the mix as I was writing Internment, because we have an internment, internally forcibly displaced persons, just like what happened in America during World War II. So I was taking some of those stories that I learned about from friends whose families had been in internment camps in the US, but also I was reading about what was happening at our own borders and at the borders of Europe. And those pieces all influenced me.
And that really piggybacks into the next questions from Rain Howard and Olivia Scana from Syracuse. They were very curious about the research aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, your history, and that's so important. But how did you go about tying that into a book that is scarily dystopian in nature? Like, how did you balance that, merging the history with dystopia?
So I started research when I started getting this idea, like maybe imagining, like, what if like the internment camps were put into the future? What if we had like a different group, if we had Muslims being illegally incarcerated? And one of the things I actually first did was I looked at a lot of old photographs of Japanese American internment camps. There's a tremendous amount of like black and white photographs that show life in these camps. I was reading, stories of survivors, young people who had been, who remember being put onto buses, leaving everything in their home, and, being sent to Manzanar or other camps. I, remember seeing these pictures of like these camps behind barbed wire. And I also think that those photographs were so moving because they really show the people, these Japanese Americans trying to make the best of what is a horrendous situation. And so those photographs, I felt like were, those photographs and those first person accounts were sort of like speaking to me from the past. And I think it's really important for us to be aware of our past, because I always like to say, like, the past isn't really even past. It's always with us. It's always part of who we are and is always going to be influencing the future. And so I don't think it wasn't a big jump to go from taking something historical and putting it into a more dystopian setting, even if, that dystopian setting isn't far in the future. It's just right, it's our tomorrow. And so I think that when we have seen throughout history, and like, obviously in internment, we see a very heavy influence of what happened in Germany in 1933 with the Nuremberg laws. Even before we got to the death camps, the Nazi Party built all of this scaffolding that would eventually lead to those things. And that included, dismissing, firing Jewish professors and academics and artists, incarcerating them. That included Kristallnacht. It included all these laws of preventing or banning books. There were massive book burnings early on during the Nazi regime. There was interfaith marriages being outlawed, people being forced to sign up on a register, getting different passports, like all of these things that are in internment. I mean, they were scary at the time. So putting them in a way into the future in some ways makes them even more terrifying, because in the book you have young people and adults too saying, we never learn from the past. And the other thing is, I feel like there's also kind of this, sort of blind eye we turn to the past, like, oh, that can't happen to us. That can't happen again. And it's a kind of a self-sabotage or a kind of disillusionment to believe that we are too good to allow atrocities to reoccur. And I think that's something that we can see right now. That can never happen. I can't believe that would ever happen. Not in America, and yet here we are.
Absolutely true. Very much highlighted in the story, with the families on the outside as well, just not really saying anything because it doesn't really affect them, obviously.
Right. Well, silence is complicity, and that is one of the major themes of the novel. But I think it's also a theme that we see throughout history. Like, it is, in order for something like a Holocaust to have occurred, in order for something like the genocide of Native Americans, in order for something like the horrors of chattel slavery in the United States to occur, for all of those things to happen, required millions and millions of people to stay quiet and to acquiesce, even if they thought it was wrong, because they were too afraid to speak out. And I hope that one of the things that people get from reading Internment, or really any of my books, is how important it is to use your voice and to use the power that you have to speak the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think of the first they came for a poem, right? When I teach my World War II unit, it's like, we can't be afraid to speak up for other people.
Absolutely.
Okay, our next question is from Lillian R.E.B. in New York, who wants to know what part of Internment was the most difficult for you to write.
Okay, so there are, I don't want to give any spoilers, but there's some deaths in Internment that occur. I mean, I shouldn't use passive voice. I killed some characters in Internment. I'm the one who did it. And those were hard to write. I didn't necessarily want to do that, but it also would be unrealistic not to. And there's also a scene of, I mean, it's kind of a closed door scene, sort of the fade to black, but a scene of referencing of torture that's happening, of things that are also happening off the page. And those were hard to write for a few reasons. One is because I wanted to balance, I don't want to have gratuitous violence in my books. I'm not a fan of it. And I think sometimes imagining things can actually make it feel more terrible. Like, I think sometimes when you do have that fade to black moment, or the door is closed on that scene of torture, you know what's going to happen. And sometimes it's more powerful not to have it on the page. All of those scenes were definitely hard to write.
Definitely the unknown sometimes is more horrific than actually reading the words itself.
Right.
Absolutely. Oh, my next question. This one is from Victoria Pelkey from Montana. And I know you talked about researching. I think what she would like to know is, how do you go about organizing all of your notes? Like, what does that look like for you?
That's an excellent question. It begins looking like a mess. I'm not going to lie. So I don't necessarily have a research strategy in place, or at least I didn't for Internment. I think because Internment was really only my second book, and now I'm like 9 books in, like, my research strategies and just writing strategies have obviously been refined, because you learn to write by writing, as all of your English teachers might say. So I very much am a fan of the research rabbit hole. So I would be reading about something at, say, Manzanar, or I might be reading, something about Franklin Roosevelt's executive order that essentially called for internment, that reclassified U.S. citizens as dangerous persons, despite the fact that they committed no crime. Or, I found something about how there were Japanese American men who were in internment camps who then went to serve in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And that battalion was one of the most decorated in US history during that war. So what happened is I might find this little tidbit of information, and then I would go into a deep dive into that. A lot of that doesn't end up in the book. Mm-hmm. But I'm taking notes on all of it because I find it so interesting. And I love putting as many of those tidbits as I can into the story because I think it's so important. I mean, for example, there's when I was researching, there's a question that appears in my novel on the census about religion. And when I was researching the census, I found that the census is not supposed to be used for a political purpose. It's supposed to be an independent office from, say, the presidency. But during World War II, it was released much later. This information came out much later, but the census actually gave information to help with the internment of Japanese Americans. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly, I have to write this into the book somehow, because I think this is a way to touch back on that historical piece, but to make it now, like what would happen now. So I try to fit as many of those things into there. There's another piece right there where I was doing some research about when Muslims first came to America and South Asians. And a lot of people think, okay, well, in 1965, there was the Civil Rights Act passed, and there was a change in our immigration laws and that kind of thing. And many more Asians came to the US after 1965. But Asians had been here much, much longer than that. And Muslims even further than that, because we think that between 15 and 30% of all enslaved Africans who were brought to this country were Muslim and then were forced to convert to Christianity. And I found some little, there's some little stories I found of enslaved persons who were Muslim who were trying to hold on to their faith. We actually have at the Smithsonian, and gosh, I'm forgetting the name of this person. We have a Bible from somebody who was forced to convert, who then, because he could speak multiple languages, was told to translate it into Arabic and into other languages that enslaved persons were speaking. And he actually, despite being forced to convert, we see in the margins him including elements of his own prayers into that. And so I tried to add a little piece of that in there. So, I mean, my research is a little bit all over the place. I'm not going to lie. But one of the things I do try to do is once I've done a lot of research, I try to sort of put it into little buckets. These are kind of small historical facts that aren't necessarily going to directly impact the entire arc of the narrative, but I think are important because they might inspire the character. For example, I have a reference to the White Rose in the novel. And one of the things I love to look at is all the ways in which young people have fought for justice throughout history. And in World War II, there were absolutely young people who did that, even in Germany, even when it cost them their lives. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted my characters to be able to be inspired by that, because none of us exist in a vacuum. So I try to incorporate those I try to incorporate history in ways that would influence, the characters, or give us little insights into the characters' thinking, or help the characters see their situation in a bigger way. Mm-hmm. And so, but I really just take handwritten notes. I have notebooks of all this information. Sometimes I put it on note cards and try to organize it that way,
old school.
Thematically. Yeah, exactly. I mean, yes, I am old school, so I do have note cards. I
Love
write
it.
down. I write down physically, a lot of my notes, and when I outline, I do sometimes do old school outlining. Mm-hmm. Like I learned in high school, Roman numeral 1, capital letter A, lowercase a, lowercase, Roman numerals. Yeah. So I sometimes outline that way too. I was happy to learn those skills. They actually served a purpose for me.
Well, your desk back there looks pretty organized, so obviously it's working.
Well, I try. Honestly, being a high school teacher really helped me with being a writer.
Great. So actually, our next question is from Mahati Adavi from Texas and Jennifer Susio in Morris, New Jersey. And they want to know about writer's block. What's your process for working through writer's block? How do you find time to maintain a writing routine?
Okay. So writer's block, I think it's really important to use language and to tell ourselves the story about ourselves. So I never say I have writer's block. I don't think I have writer's block. I sometimes hit speed bumps. I like to sometimes call it speed bumps because I feel like, language is important, and like the language that we use about ourselves becomes the story of who we are, right? So I don't like the word block. It just bothers me. I feel like I'm weaponizing that language against my own creativity. So sometimes I hit speed bumps, but what I will often do when that happens is I might take a little break. That might be a good time to like find that pastry I really like. I think that sometimes I like to I like to sort of consume other media or art sometimes at that time, because I think that inspires me. Sometimes I have a lot of poetry books. Sometimes I'll just try to read a poem. Sometimes there's poems that I'll just reread or just have up on my desk. Like during COVID, I had a copy of the Good Bones by Maggie Smith that I would just read because that was a tough time, I think for a lot of us, and that was something that was helping me get through. So I sometimes think you just need to retool the way you're thinking about it. And I think especially like if you're in school and you're having a writer's block about an essay that's due, you need to find sort of a little bit of a quick fix, right? And sometimes I need to do that too because I'm on deadline. And so I really try to organize my time because ultimately, writing is my job. It's an art, but it's also my profession. And I'm a full-time writer, and I try to schedule my days in the same way a person with, a different, I don't want to say necessarily more traditional, maybe a job where they go into a physical place or, where they're working more directly with colleagues might have a schedule. So I set like writing schedules. I try to do like administrative stuff at the beginning of the morning. And then when I'm on deadline, I have daily writing goals. And I actually keep track of those just using this very simple website called Pacemaker Press. And I schedule out my writing. So if I have to write a book in say 3 months, and I'm going to guess that book is going to be about 75,000 words, say, or 80,000 words. So I just like put this information into my website, and this Pacemaker Press website, and it does all the calculations for you, which is great. Less math for me, but it essentially creates the spreadsheet you need. And you're like, okay, well, I need to write this many chapters today, or this many words rather, or et cetera. And I try to stick with it. And I also am one of those people who creates early false deadlines for myself. Do you ever do that?
Oh, yeah.
It really works. I think you're probably getting the idea that I'm a very type A person. And so you can see some of those teacher organizational skills that kind of go into play. Like when you're a teacher, you absolutely, like you can't turn in your grades late. Like grades are due when grades are due. And so I take that same approach to, this is my deadline and this is what I got to do. And so sometimes it's a little bit like get your butt in the chair and do the work.
Do you work on more than one text at a time? This is a question from Anvisha Sakran from Maryland. Or do you just tunnel vision on one, or can you do both at the same time?
So I do work on multiple projects at the same time, but I don't work on them all in the same day. So for example, I have a book that's coming out next year. It hasn't been announced yet, but it's fall 2026. And it's a historical fiction novel. So I did a lot of research for that one. And it's also a novel in verse. So that was an interesting challenge. But while I was doing that, I also was writing 2 short stories and a novelette. So an extended short story. That's 4 things that I'm writing all at once, right? and they all have different deadlines. So I write it out because I'm old school. I have a whiteboard in my office, and I try to jot down all the deadlines, figure out how they'll go. It's kind of like a puzzle, right? And then I usually try to only work on one thing at a time consistently. So it's like I have the short story due in 2 weeks, and I try as hard as I can to schedule all of my deadlines working with my various publishers and editors so that I have these chunks of time, so that I will have submitted, say, my rough draft or my first draft or second draft or copy edits of my novel, and then I know I'm gonna have 4 weeks. So I'm going to write a short story. I'm going to write one short story this week or in these 2 weeks, and then go to the next short story the next 2 weeks. So I'm not sure how to, I sort of stack, I do work on them at the same time, but I stack them. Occasionally it happens where you do have to, like when I was writing the Miss Marvel comics, I was also writing a novel, and comics have a really tight deadline. So you're writing a whole comic in 3 weeks. So in that case, I had to sort of stack my days. So I was like, okay, 9 to 12 is going to be, I'm going to work on this, then I'm going to have lunch. It's very important, everyone, to make time for lunch, okay? I'm a big believer. Don't eat at your desk if you can avoid it. And then I will do 1 to 3. Then I might be like, okay, now I have to take a break and get the kids. Then after dinner, I'm going to do that chunk too. So that's kind of how I divide up my time. I don't know. It's a long answer to a short question.
Okay, so our next question is from William Hamilton in Pennsylvania. And they want to know, what role do you think young adult literature plays in critiquing current social political issues?
Mm-hmm. Great question. I obviously am a fan of young adult literature and also of teenagers because I taught them and I write for them. And I am going to just put out there that I think young adult literature takes more risks than adult literature because, look, you're engaging with young people, and young people are smart, and they, I want to honor the voices and stories of young people that I've met through my work. And I know how engaged with their world young people are. I know the big questions that they have. I know sometimes the fear that they have, the anger that they have. And I think it's such an interesting time for them to sort of take those things in, learn their place in the world, learn the power of their voice. And I hope my books and all young adult literature gives them a vehicle or a space to imagine, both the person that they want to be, the world as it could be, the world that they could help create, because young people do that. I mean, I referenced, for example, the White Rose in Internment, but there's so many examples of young people being politically engaged on both the community and the global level. And I think that young adult literature is absolutely the place to speak to that can speak to the power of it. I think one of the through lines in all my novels is this question. And the question is, how can I use my power and privilege for a purpose? All of my characters have to engage with that question in one way or another. Some of them disengage with that question. Some of them are just finding, they're not becoming revolutionaries like Layla in Internment, but they are revolutionary in their own life because maybe they're just finding a place for themselves. Maybe they're finding their voice, and that is their first step into just becoming the person that they want to be. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're realizing what's holding them back and stepping out from behind those blocks. So I think that young people are politically engaged. Our entire world is political. Like, individuals and groups of people have become politicized just because of their existence, just because they're immigrants, just because of who they love, just because they're Black or brown, just because they look like they could be, quote unquote, illegal. which I don't think is a phrase should ever be ascribed to a human being, but because they look like they could potentially be undocumented, they're being like taken up off the streets. And I think trying to hide that from young people is just, I mean, it doesn't work. Like, they live in this world. they see the world around them. They see what's happening in their schools. Like, schools are not in a bubble. And so, you know, sometimes people will say to me, well, why are your books so political or whatever? I'm like, well, all art is political. And when creatives say that, oh, well, I'm not political, that's actually making a political choice. Like, in a world where human beings are politicized just for their existence, every choice is a political act, whether it's the book that you choose to read, whether it's the books that are on your library shelves, you know, whether it's your decision to speak up against an injustice, small or big. You know, this very inspiring story that I'm going to just share is about a young person making a change in almost like this cosmic way. Like, during COVID, do you remember the start of COVID? There was a real shortage of masks, right? And one of the hardest hits, especially at the start of COVID, were, you know, homes for senior citizens, like where, you know, our elders were getting care where they no longer were able to see their loved ones. And this kid in my neighborhood, who was a middle schooler, you know, if you all remember, that's like when we were sort of trying to make masks at home, like with fabric. I learned how to do it too. Mm-hmm. And this young kid asked his mom to teach him how to sew masks. And then he made some masks and took them to one of the retirement homes and dropped them off so that the people who lived there could have access to masks. Mm-hmm. And then he taught some of his friends how to do it. And collectively, they were individually in their homes, but like, you know, on Zoom together, making some masks for these elders. And I thought, my God, this is a kid who's in middle school. How amazing for this young person to take this initiative and to do that. And did that change the whole world? No, but it might have changed somebody's life and it might have saved a life. Like, my gosh, that is incredible to me. Mm-hmm. And so when I talk about young people making changes, sometimes one of the most powerful things that you can change is right in your own community.
Yeah.
So true. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. It's so important not to hide things from them because they see it and they need an outlet too. You know, ICE is very much in my community that I teach in, and they see it every day, and not talking about it does a disservice to them.
100%.
Samira, you touched on really the next question quite a bit. This one is from Rain Hellstrom from Utah, and you weave so expertly the themes of activism, obviously, in your stories. Do you ever fear, or how do you make sure that you're not coming across too strongly? Sometimes I'm sure you feel like there's a heavy hand that, you know, like,
of course,
say it a certain way. So what happens when you have those moments in your writing?
So I definitely do. I mean, I think number one, remember how I said I want to honor young people, mm-hmm. their voices and their stories. I also want to honor their intelligence. And like, when you are when you're hitting it on the head, like so overtly, I'm like, come on, okay, they get it, right? I mean, I grew up in the time of like after school specials, and which, if you don't know what that is, it was like these shows or movies that were on like at 3:30, and they all were very like lesson oriented, like mm-hmm. Johnny smoked cigarettes behind the football stadium, and now he has cancer. Don't smoke. Like, you know, it was like so, it was so overt. And so I always say I never want to write that after school special. Like, I never want my books to feel that way. Mm-hmm. I want my characters to feel real. I want them to make mistakes. I want some of them to learn from their mistakes, and some of them maybe aren't going to learn from their mm-hmm. mistakes. I want sometimes for them to make bad choices, because who amongst us has not? Especially when we were young. And I don't want them to be perfect activists. There's no such thing. I just want them. I mean, some of the characters aren't that at all. Some of them are just trying, some of them are failing, some of them are trying to turn the blind eye. And I think that I try just to always not insult anybody's intelligence when they're reading my books. And, you know, I remember somebody once asked me if I have to, quote, dumb down my books because I write them for teenagers. And I was like, no, I think you actually have to dumb down books when you're writing for adults, because teenagers are much smarter than you think they are.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have all the sort of, I don't know, layers of scar tissue that maybe adults do that require you to sort of like force something into their heads. Young, I don't know, I really don't like when I really get angry when people put down young adult literature, because I feel like they're putting down young adults, and I find that really infuriating.
Mm-hmm. I think both Elizabeth and I would totally agree. Just being middle school teachers, we get that quite a bit. Like,
oh yes,
oh my gosh, they kind of, outsiders look at us like, are you crazy? And I'm like, it's the best kept secret. This is the best age level. This is the best
yes.
age group.
You know, middle schoolers also, because one of the things that's amazing about them is that they ask great questions.
Yep.
They don't have filters in the same way that adults do, but they have incredible curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And that curiosity is such a gift for them and in the classroom. And I feel like every adult, our job is to nurture that curiosity, to build it, not to squelch it. And because I feel like as you get older, sometimes your imagination closes. And I think that's tragic.
Mm-hmm.
Like if everyone could keep their imagination from when they were in 7th grade or 8th grade, I personally think the world would be a lot better place.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay, Lauren Gomez in New Jersey wants to know, considering the state of the world today, how realistic do you think Internment's depiction of the future could be?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty realistic. It's like, I mean, it's really happening now in a lot of ways. We have, we have masked, armed, unidentified government, federal authorities or whatever, like rounding up people on the street. We have entire groups being scapegoated. We had just in Boston yesterday or 2 days ago, there were people who were taking their citizenship tests, okay? Their citizenship oaths, not the test. That means they have done every single thing. Like that they have documented everything. They've applied for their green card. They've had a green card. They've lived in the US. They've paid their taxes. They have done everything. They are permanent residents who then, after being here the number of required years, took their citizenship test, passed the test, and now they're coming to the final oath-taking ceremony, which is really just a celebration, really. Mm-hmm. You go in front of a judge, you take an oath to become an American, to uphold the laws of the United States. And then some very nice, like, people give you give a party afterwards or whatever. And it's usually a joyful thing because people are there with their families. I don't know if you've ever been to a court where you've seen this oath-taking ceremony, but it is actually wonderful. Mm-hmm. It is like one of the best things that you could witness because people are so happy. And just 2 days ago, people who were going there were pulled out of line and were told that they were no longer able to become citizens and they couldn't take this oath because of their country of origin. Mm-hmm. That is so horrendous to me. That is antithetical to America. Mm-hmm. And so many of the things that we're seeing now, to me, are antithetical to our democracy and are anti-American and are anti-freedom. Like, I believe in freedom. I believe that we should have the freedom to read and the freedom to write and the freedom to love and the freedom to exist in the way that we want to, like in our own skin, because as long as we're not hurting or harming somebody, you know what I mean? Like, I want us to really understand that a democracy is in so many ways on the sort of most local level, is neighbors taking care of neighbors? Is our community taking care of each other? Is believing that you have the same rights as I do, that if your rights are taken away, that our democracy is not whole, and that should hurt me too.
Mm-hmm.
I basically just, I mean, I think that everything in internment, there are things in internment that I wrote that had not yet occurred. There's two things. One, I'll just give one example. In the very beginning of internment, we see Layla at her boyfriend's house, and she's out past curfew. And we all know of cities that have had to have curfews recently. But we, like Washington, D.C., there was a curfew when the National Guard was just present in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. So Layla's out past curfew. She's with her boyfriend. She's going to try to sneak back home and not get caught by authorities. And then both of them get a text message on their phones. It's a text alert from a presidential text alert on their phones. And that had not yet occurred when I had written that. Oops. Are you still seeing me? Okay, yeah, sorry. Mm-hmm. I think there was a little glitch on my end. I apologize. And later on, I think the year or year and a half after the book was published, President Trump sent that first national presidential text message to all of our phones. I don't know if y'all remember it. So I think that the things that happen in internment can absolutely happen now because they've already happened in history.
Mm-hmm. It's like you had a crystal ball when we were reading it. It's terrifying, but it's so accurate. Your ability to see the future is just.
I mean, I wish it was. I wish it was like there's peace on earth and everyone gets $1 million or something like that. I should have written that, but
that's the next book.
Yeah,
alas,
that's true.
Right.
Veronica Batusta from Mexico. She wants to know about the reception of internment and how did that influence your next work politically and socially.
So, Internment is actually my most read book. It's my most widely sold book. It was a New York Times bestseller, both as hardcover and paperback. And it's the book I'm most known for. And I'm definitely proud of that. And I thank my readers so much for that, because it's still being read, as you know, 6 years later. And I think that, I mean, of course, I definitely got haters, like a lot. I definitely got death threats. And, but I have to say that overall, the reader reception to that, and just talking to people like you, people bringing it to their classrooms, or talking to young people who read it, who are asking questions, it's really, it's very meaningful to me. And it's honestly pretty inspiring. And none of those, I don't shy away from overtly political topics, I guess. Like I said, there's this through line of that question that appears in all my books. How can I use my power and privilege for a purpose? I think it's a question every adult should be asking themselves. And really every young person, as they're coming into their own, as they're forming their own politics, should be asking themselves. And I also have this through line of stories of the revolutionary girl. And my novels all have revolutionary girls at the center, but sometimes those revolutions can be, a personal revolution like I talked about. Sometimes it's just really standing up to, people who are trying to shut you down. Sometimes it's like Layla, which is like leading an internal rebellion. But my stories, just because of who I am, will always be political. So I don't shy away from that. I mean, part of the job of art is to tell the truth. I mean, to give us a mirror to see ourselves, and also to, to create those windows for us to catch a glimpse into other people's lives.
So our next question, you have kind of touched on already, but Leah Zewu in Virginia wants to know, what do you hope readers understand about their personal responsibility to speak out in order to avoid, this prejudice becoming normalized?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of become normalized already because not enough people are speaking out. I think people are I really encourage people to understand that they have more power than they think. And I think there's some of us who have more privilege and should be using it. And it's so often the people with the most power and privilege who are the most afraid. And I'm like, guys, no, that's wrong. You have the most power and privilege, so this is your opportunity to speak up for people who are more vulnerable. I obviously want every young person to be safe, so I don't want any of them to put themselves in harm's way. That's the job of adults, frankly, to do. But I also think that you can begin at a very young age to understand that we are a community and that our fates are intertwined, and no one is free until we're all free. And I just really believe that so much, that you cannot believe in the promise of what America is supposed to be and want to cause ill or harm to other human beings just because they don't look like you.
You
that's
just
important to me.
Beautifully responded to the next two questions.
Okay.
Like you predicted once again with your crystal ball. Chris Zollner from New York and Suli Ovalera, they both very similar questions. What young readers hope to gain from your stories? And you just said it. No one's free until we're all free. Chris wanted to know from New York, just overall, the classroom reception of your story, and what in general, besides obviously the wonderful message that no one's free until we're all free, what other messages are you hoping that students will take from your stories?
Well, I mean, like I said, I don't want to be like the after school special, but I do think I like when students can ask themselves that question. I know I've said this a few times, but what is the place where are places where I can use my voice for a greater good? And sometimes, again, it's small. Like I had one, I actually did a presentation at NCTE with a teacher and a group of students who had read Internment, and then in small groups, they were trying to figure out what are ways that I can make a change. And remember, you're not necessarily going to in your classroom group project, be able to create world peace. If you could, that would be amazing. Go for it if you think you can. But one group in this class said, you know what, we don't have classroom recycling at the school. And so they put together a proposal. They went to their administrators. They presented at the school board. They worked, I think, with the PTA to try to get money for the recycling bins. And they got recycling bins in all the classrooms. Okay, people might be like, well, who cares? It's just a recycling bin. That's actually a change in that school. That means that young people at that school made a change that the adults weren't able to do or weren't even thinking about doing. How cool is that? I love that they were like, hey, this is one small way we can contribute. And I just really want people to understand that that these small changes and these small victories really add up. It's really important. Because those young people, they saw a deficiency in their school. They worked together as a group to find a solution to that deficiency. They petitioned the school board and the adults in charge to solve this. And now they have created a solution for not just their own generation of young people going to that school, but for the next one. That is incredible to me.
That, we're just all piggybacking off each other, because our next question from Huda Sultan Ahmed Salim in Tennessee wanted to know, how could teachers use internment to help students build critical thinking and empathy?
Well, I mean, I think reading books is a way to create empathy, period. But I do think I love when people can young readers and all readers really kind of self-insert into so many characters, right? They find the character that's most like them and imagine it. And one of the things I actually liked doing when I was a teacher was having students write a letter in the voice of the character. Because I think, especially if you're especially in middle school or ninth grade, some of the early grades, if you're reading in that, and it can be however you want it to be, a letter to the editor or a letter to someone in charge or a teacher, because I love that puts the student in that character's shoes. Because I think, like I said, you know, we all know about mirrors and windows. That's a perfect way to go from a window, someone looking in on someone else, to a mirror where you're like, okay, I'm able to reflect a piece of this. I'm seeing myself in this. So I think that there's a lot of projects that you can do to do that. I think class discussion is a great way to do that. And I always think it's interesting, the questions that students ask me. And so I thought, one school I went to visit, a couple of students are really challenging me on Layla pushing back against her parents so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was interesting. I was like, oh, okay. These teenagers were actually relating to the parents, because they were like, they're just trying to protect their daughter. Why is she being so mean and terrible to them? And then I asked the other students in the classroom, like, why do you think that she's doing that? And of course there were kids who like took Layla's side, but I just love when we can have like those big, I'm a fan of classroom discussion, because I think that students have so many interesting insights into the books. But I love asking the question of students, like, what is a change that they think they could make and how will they make it? Like, just like this group did. I mean, I just had, this happened in Georgia recently. One of my books, This Book Won't Burn, which is my book that came out last year. It's a book about book bans and censorship, was on the Georgia Peach Award list. Georgia's, it's a state award. Mm-hmm. It's like a finalist. And part of what they do in Georgia is they have a reading bowl, and it's a statewide reading bowl. And so there's teams from all these schools and they compete against each other. It's like the spelling bee, but with books. And it's like a quiz bowl. So then they have to answer questions about all these books that are the finalists. And, you know, it's actually pretty cool. I was like, this is an awesome way to get books to young people. But this year, the committee very quietly decided that of these 20 books, 8 were going to be excluded from the bowl. And one of them was mine. And then there were 7 others. All these books happened to be by Black, brown, or queer authors. Surprise. I didn't know about this because there wasn't a big announcement about it. But I only found out about it because a student emailed me about it. And then the students, because remember, these are kids who are competing in different schools, the students who knew each other, because, you know, it's like whether you're Model UN or Science Olympiad, you know each other, right, from other schools. The students from different schools joined together, created a petition, wrote a letter to the committee. These are all students, to say that it is the whole purpose of this reading bowl is to expand, like, you know, this access to books to young people. And the bowl had closed these off without explanation. Mm-hmm. They didn't like share a letter. They just put one sentence saying that we've excluded 8 of these books. They're not going to be we're not going to consider them part of the bowl, even though that's always what has happened traditionally. The students got that decision reversed. Awesome. They got people to sign the petition. They sent letters to that committee. They got media coverage. So I mean, this kind of goes back to this idea of like both empathy and also realizing your own power and activism. I mean, because one of the students who wrote this letter said, I thought it was especially terrible, but that they're essentially trying to censor us reading This Book Won't Burn, which is a book about censorship. Right. And in that book, there is nothing, for example, there's no sex, there's extremely, there might be some very mild profanity, but that's it. There's no content in that book. And the student in the email to them said, the irony that you are trying to prevent us from reading a book that's about censorship should not be lost on you, but apparently it is.
That's a good response. Crazy.
I know. Yeah, I know.
Nathaniel Medina from New Hampshire wants to know, did you begin publishing poetry and short stories after writing novels? And were there different hurdles to overcome when publishing different genres of work?
So I did have a couple of poems published in just like really small, like online journals. All of my short stories and anthologies came after I wrote my first novel. Although actually I had an essay in a book about librarians that came out before my first novel. But I had already made the deal for my first novel. So I kind of always wanted to be a poet, and I loved writing poetry, but back in the olden days, you had to submit to journals by sending them a physical copy of your poem along with a self-addressed stamped envelope.
Yeah.
I don't know if young people know what that is. It's like you put your own address on the envelope and you stamp it, and then whether they reject you or accept you, they mail back your piece with maybe a comment on it. So it was very, very hard to get any poetry published. Like I said, I was successful in maybe getting 2 things published. And but then in Internment, I made the dad a poet. And I was like, look, the fastest way I could figure out to become a poet is by becoming a novelist and then writing a character who was a poet and writing their poetry. And then my publisher is forced to publish my poetry as Layla's dad. So, but now I'm writing a novel in verse. So I eventually got there. I mean, I think the process, if you are going to be submitting just poetry or just short stories, the process is very different. I mean, especially think now, like people submit to journals or lit magazines mostly via Submittable, I think, honestly. And honestly, most lit magazines and journals are not well funded, and there's only a couple people going through hundreds and thousands of stories and poems in the slush pile. So it can take months. It can take sometimes 6 months for someone to get back to you, or 9 months. And in that time, I could write a whole book. So I think the processes are very different, and you have to decide which you want to do. I mean, now, of course, because I'm a published author, it's a different situation. So now, like with Miss Marvel, that was kind of a dream I had to write. Like, I remember thinking early on in my career, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if I could write this first South Asian Muslim, like, superhero? And then because I had published I think 3 books or something by that time, Marvel actually came to my agent and asked them, would Samira be interested in this? Because a couple of our editors have read her books, and we think her dialogue fits the voice of this teen very well. So that was an opportunity that I got. That was really like a bucket list kind of opportunity because of my books being published. But I'm not going to lie, it's kind of a slog in the beginning. Like, you're just sending in your novel. Like you write the whole novel, Love, Hate, and Other Filters. I wrote the whole book. You have no idea if anyone's going to buy it or even read it, or if it's going to sell. And you just do your best to make it as good as you can, as you would with any poem or short story. And then you put a little faith in yourself and you do the legwork. It's good to have tenacity and gumption.
Always.
That goes right into our next question by Thessanica Eunice Chan in New Hampshire, who wants to know how you got into the comic book writing. If you want to talk a little bit about that process, especially with your work with Miss Marvel.
Yeah, sure. So you heard the origin story of how Marvel approached me, and I was like 100% yes, this is super cool. I did not know how to write a comic book. It's totally different than writing a novel or a poem or a short story. You're essentially writing a kind of a script. So Marvel actually, my wonderful editors actually gave me kind of a class, like Marvel 101, how do you write a comic? And I also studied by reading a lot of comics, and I was also able to get some comic scripts and then look at the comic script side by side with the actual published comic. So I could see how what the author had written came to life on the page. Because as the author, when I say a script, I'm not just writing the dialogue, I'm describing the entire panel. So if the first panel is, my very first panel, I think Miss Marvel was like chilling on the couch at her cousin's apartment in Chicago, and there's like a backdrop. It's like an all modern, like glass apartment building. We can see the Bean and some other Chicago elements in the background. And Miss Marvel is relaxing, but her cousin is cooking, and we hear the sort of sizzling smells, and Miss Marvel is sort of salivating. There's no dialogue in that, right? But I'm going to describe all of those things that I talked about. I'm going to talk about what she's wearing. I'm going to talk about what her face looks like. I'm going to talk about the sizzle sound effect coming from off the page. And then the artist takes that and creates the panel with it. And if there's dialogue, we later on will add the dialogue, you know, the text that's in the little bubble. But then after the artist, you know, pencils all of it, then he shares it with me and the editors. And this is after the editors and I have already gone through multiple rounds of editing on the script. Then we share it with the illustrator. The illustrator creates the pencils, the sketches. We comment on it like, oh no, the couch is on the wrong side, because in the next panel, she actually has to be in this place. And in comics, you know, there's a physicality to comics. So you can't be in one panel like I'm sitting here at my desk and immediately in the next panel, I would be downstairs in the kitchen. That's not going to work unless I have some kind of transition, whether it's a page turn or something else that's on the page. So sometimes we have to change the physical locations of things on the drawing. So it's a lot of back and forth. It's really a team effort in a way that writing a novel isn't. But I learned so much, and it's fascinating, and illustrators are just amazing. The way they can bring a story to life is truly a wonder.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
Did you get to
Speaking of
meet the illustrator at all?
illustrations, the cover of Internment is just fabulous. I just wanted
isn't
to
it great?
get that in
it's
there.
it's like by this artist. Her name is Dana Liedl, L-E-D-L. She has an Instagram, and I don't really have. Authors don't have the final yay or nay on their covers. The publishers do, but they consult us, and my publisher just nailed this. Like they asked me, like, Samira, what is your vision? What do you imagine? Like, what's a scene from the book that you'd like to see depicted, or if there's an important motif or image. And I said, I don't know, like I'd like to have like a singular illustrated image of a young woman, and maybe there's like barbed wire, and maybe the word resist is like there too. And then I got back and I was like, what? Okay, perfect. So it was amazing. I loved that cover.
Yeah.
And she also did the cover for Hollow Fires.
Right, which I have right up there. Yes.
Another amazing
Beautiful.
illustrator. I'm very lucky in my covers.
Yep. Elizabeth, I kind of condensed a couple questions. I think you have the last one on this page.
Okay, sure. So Kellen Rust in Texas is curious about your process of finding an agent that you liked.
Okay, so I like that they added the question, or added that I liked to it, because I think that's important, because finding an agent it's a little bit like an arranged marriage, sort of. So you are going to query your agent, and you're going to begin the query process by, number one, doing a ton of research on agents. You're going to find out what genres they represent, what age groups they represent, what you're going to look at the kinds of authors that they represent. And you have to also think about your career. Like I started with young adult, but I knew that maybe I would write middle grade, and maybe one day I would write adult. So I wanted an agent who would be able to focus on all of those. I really wanted an agent who was a career agent. I didn't want an agent who was just going to sell one book. I wanted an agent for a career. And so I did a ton of research, and I think there's a lot of information out there for folks. I used Query Tracker as one place to find information, and I sort of created a database, or Query Tracker will create it for you, of all these agents that I was interested in. Of course, before I even did that, I made sure that my book was as perfect as I could make it on my own. And then I crafted a query letter. I got input on it from other writers and friends to make sure it was as strong as it could be. And then when you hopefully get offers from agents, it's really important to interview the agent. So I think a lot of times in the arts, because it's a dream that you've had for so long and it feels like so out of reach, you're just excited to get an offer from any agent. But a bad agent is worse than no agent, because they can really derail your career. So you have to ask them, you have to interview with them, you have to ask them the questions. They're working with you, that it's a partnership. So you also need to do like a gut check. And so I think doing all those, there's so many stories online that you can look up. Like best queries, or what do I ask an agent, or when you leave an agent, like I am actually on my second agent now. I left my first agent. Sometimes that can be scary, but I wanted a sort of a different agency, an agency that had a slightly different approach, that had the sub rights all within the agency, for example. So, I guess you have to, it is part of it is a gut check, but it's like a job interview. You wouldn't want to take a really bad job.
Isabella Estevez from Florida, I think, again, piggybacking perfectly, you've got your agent. What advice would you have for students who are looking to be a writer? So in their early stages, what advice do you have?
I mean, well, I do want young people to know that if you have a novel that you've written and you feel like you're ready to find an agent, you can look for an agent when you're pretty young. There are people who have been published like while in college. That means they were honing their novel in high school. But I think the most important thing, if you are a young person who thinks you want to get published, it is very important to focus on the present, which is writing that novel or short story or whatever it is. And you have to kind of be tough on yourself, because writing is really rewriting. You've got the first draft, great. Now you're going to probably have 7 more drafts or more before you can get it to a place where it's possibly even submittable. So I want you to really think, and you have to be tough on yourself. How am I going to make this story the tightest it can be? What are the lessons I learned from my English class? How did I learn to edit or even co-edit? When you're doing peer editing, like are there peers that you can share your story with, who can help you edit it? Are there trusted adults? Are there organizations like, for example, SCBWI, the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, where you can take online classes, where you can meet critique groups? All of those things I think are important. And some high schools and middle schools have like lit magazines, or you can join your newspaper if you want to get practice writing. And I think all of those are great resources to have. I visited some schools that actually just have like book clubs and writing clubs. Another great resource to join. I mean, I think you also have to grow a thick skin, because you have to be able to take criticism. And if you've been in English class and you've written an essay, your teacher probably has given you some constructive criticism. If you're going to become a professional writer, you're going to get much, much, much more of that. So you have to be willing to take it, and also hear it in a way that, sometimes we can take criticism so personally. It feels like a personal attack. But the way I like to think of it is this: my editor and I are working together on this. She also wants this book to be the best it can be. I want the book to be the best it can be. But I have to be open to hearing some of that criticism, because maybe that other reader is seeing something in a way that I can't see because I'm the author, I'm too close to it. And I have to be open and curious. Like, I think it's really important to approach your editing process and like criticism with curiosity. Well, what if I did this thing that this person suggested? My first novel, Love, Hate, and Other Filters, I originally wrote the whole thing in third person. And my editor said, what if you take a crack at this in first person? Maybe it's going to be more powerful. And my first instinct was like, what? No, I already wrote the whole book. Why do I have to do this again? And then he was like, just try it for 3 chapters. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll do this. Reluctantly, I'm going to do it. And honestly, number one, it was so much easier than I thought. And that made me realize, you know what? This is actually how it's supposed to be written. That's a lot of work to change a whole novel from that.
I can't even imagine basically starting over. Writing is definitely not for the weak of heart.
Yeah.
Okay, so my last question is from Stephanie Fortuna in New Jersey, and they want to know, how can young writers pursue literary activism connected to their own passions? And how should they begin?
So I love the phrase literary activism. That can mean a lot of things. So I'm going to share some examples from some of my books that young people do, like In This Book Won't Burn. because in the United States, we're dealing a lot with book bans and censorship. In the last 4.5 years, almost 25,000 books have been banned across the United States. And unfortunately, we're seeing those bans carry over into Canada and into England, into parts of Europe, which is terrible. But literary activism can take many forms. And I think in This Book Won't Burn, one of the things the kids do is create a banned book club. They call it band camp. And they're reading banned books aloud off campus. And there's plenty of examples of kids doing just that, of banned book clubs in schools or offsite at their libraries or in people's homes. I think another thing that they do in the book is, and actually this was another great example of somebody doing something cool after they read one of my books. In This Book Won't Burn, one of the ways the young people try to share books is by creating, little free libraries, outside your home, those little like houses that have the free books in them. You can leave one, take one, whatever. And so these young people create like 5 or 6 around their town, and they get donations from different, from booksellers and the librarians and other people to put in their little free libraries. So one school that read my book, one young woman decided that she was going to make a little free library fill it with banned books, just like the kids in that book. And I happened to just see her at NCTE because she's training to be a teacher now. And so her teacher, and she saw me and they're like, "Oh, do you remember us? We talked to you, and the little free library is still going." And I was like, "Yes, amazing." So those are all little forms of literary activism. What those kids in Georgia did, I think it's never too early to fight for your freedom to read, because the freedom to read is the freedom to think. And I just think that's it's a fundamental human right, I think. So if you see, and it's also you're never too young to call your elected officials, and you're never too young to show up at a school board. I mean, I went to, and I really encourage young people in their localities, if you have a school board, go to the meetings. You have a right to be there. Well, I spoke in Michigan at a district that was banning 2 of my books, Internment and Hollow Fires. And I went there on invitation of the librarian and an English teacher alongside 2 other authors. And, but what was the best was a young woman from the high school who spoke to the school board. And she went before them. The school board was trying to actually censor 200 books, 100 of which were picture books in the district. And she went in front of them and she said, "I can't believe I'm here on a school night telling you to let me read books." That's a form of activism that's amazing. And it was so powerful when she went up there. I think there's lots of ways that young people can make changes. And look, I think reading widely and diversely is also a form of political activism.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Samira, we're winding down with the last question, which you've already tapped into, but this one is from Brad Theed from New Hampshire again, and he would like you to talk a little bit more about strategies right now for students who are dreaming of being a professional writer. I know you talked a little bit about it for Isabel's question. What do you have any additional strategies for our young students who would like to go into writing as a profession?
So I think a few things. Number one, I mean, I already talked about sort of like the emotional part, like where you have to be willing to take criticism, and that's actually a skill that you can build. I think it's really important, if you can, it is very hard to share your writing, but that's also another thing that you have to get used to doing. And I think it would be great if you could even find 2 or 3 other people, ideally around the same age as you, where you can swap your stories and where they can give you their thoughts on your stories. I think it's really important to start sharing your writing. And I would love if you were like, "Hey, I'm doing that, Samira. I'm good with taking criticism, and I share my writing, and I'm going to encourage you to try to take the first steps to being published." And if it's say like it's a poem, or say like it's a short story, I am going to ask you to work with your English teachers or your librarians to find journals or magazines, or even contests for high school students or middle school students where you can submit your work. And some publishers even have contests like that. Scholastic, for example, has that contest. There's a lot of those things out there. So I would really encourage you to do that, because how cool to be published when you are in middle school or high school. And even if you're only published in your district newsletter, that's still being published. I was technically published in 4th grade because one of my poems was put in my district newsletter. That is a publication. When you are, and also one thing I want you to be aware of, say like you're putting it online, maybe you're putting it on Wattpad, or maybe you're putting it somewhere else. I want you to know your rights too, and be careful of what you put online, because once you put something online, it is considered published. And why am I being cautionary about that? It's because if it's online, it's considered published. You might not be able to publish it somewhere else. So for example, say like you just put it on, I don't know if young people are doing blogs anymore, but say like you put it on something like Wattpad, but then it's getting traction. You think, oh wait, I should take this off, and then maybe, re-edit it and submit it as a book to try to find an agent. Depending on how it does on Wattpad, it might be, if it does a smashing success, yes, you're gonna find, if it's viral on Wattpad, you're gonna find an agent and a publisher. But a lot of times, agents or publishers might be a little reticent, because if you've already had X many readers, are people going to read it again? And sometimes they don't want to republish something. So just be aware of where you're putting things and what your purpose in doing that is. And I think the other thing I would suggest is, I guess a couple other things. Okay, so I would also look to online classes, or if you have local classes at your library, like writing craft classes. So for example, in Chicago, Story Studio is a great organization that offers classes for adults and also for young people. They have summer writing workshops, but they also have online writing workshops. I think I take classes like that too, because I still like to continue building my craft. I buy craft books, like Stephen King on writing. I love reading when authors write about craft. Ruta Sepetys, who is a young adult writer and also middle grade writer, has put out a book on writing craft and writing advice. So like behind me, like one of my bookshelves, it's just like full of writing and craft books. So that, I just threw a lot of things at you, but hopefully one of them will stick for someone.
Read a lot, write a lot, learn a lot.
Yes.
Keep going.
Yes. Don't be afraid.
This has been the most fabulous little over an hour. Thank you so much for sharing all of your great insight. Congratulations on all of your amazing accomplishments. Thank you so much on behalf of all of us in the English Honor Societies and all of our students. We enjoyed your story so much. The Big Read was nothing short of just a masterpiece. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It's so kind. On behalf of Elizabeth and myself, this has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for sending in these amazing questions.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Samira. Thank you, Bridget and Elizabeth, for a thought-provoking and very inspiring interview. And thank you for all of you for joining us tonight and sharing your questions. A recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel. So that's at Sigma Tau Delta English. So be sure to subscribe for updates and for some more content. If you'd like to read Internment or explore more of Samira's work, including her latest novel, this is a very good novel, The Singular Life of Arya Patel, visit the English Honor Society's bookshop page. Every purchase made there will support authors and independent bookstores. If your chapter plans to read Internment together, be sure to download our new book club kit that's available on both the ELA, NEHS, and Sigma Tau Delta websites. And it includes details on how you can engage in activism on your campus and beyond. You can also learn more about our partnership with the Little Free Library and the funding we have available to help you set them up on our websites too. And don't miss our next webinar with TJ Clune, Lambda Literary Award-winning author of Under the Whispering Door. That's on February 11th at 6 p.m. Central. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.